so thank you for everything in the organization. When we wrote this kind of excellence cluster proposal, it turned out that there was something not perfectly clear. So the purpose of the talk is actually twofold. So at the beginning I will try to introduce some terms. So what is deep learning, what is end-to-end learning. And then the second part I want to a little bit explain and hope to give you the main message. If you have a problem, is deep learning the right way for you to take? Or is the problem where they have deep learning maybe not the right choice? So this is the purpose for the talk today. And that means if you have any background in machine learning, it will be quite boring. So this is really for people which don't have the background. So it's very high level. And this is also the starting point. I mean, in the news, you read mainly about AI, not so much about machine learning. And AI is a very diverse field, and machine learning is actually part of it. But technically, machine learning, that's the important part of AI, because this is the part that works. And as part of machine learning, there are many methods, and one of them are called deep learning. And I will want to give a little kind of an overview, just a bit high level, what this type of methods are, and also get a little bit of feeling what can be done. This is the opportunities, and what are the problems, and this is the challenges. So for deep learning, most cases people refer actually to two types of methods. So one are convolutional networks. So this is typically when you have kind of your data in a grid format. So for instance, if I have like an image here, all the pixels are nicely on a grid. If you do some kind of measurements, let's say under the ground, at the ground level, at the plant level, then you have all the data measurements in kind of a three-dimensional space. This is also like a good way where you can use these convolutional networks. So as soon as you somehow have some kind of spatially arranged data, this is actually where these tools are extremely powerful. And I want to talk a little bit kind of like the basic idea. If you have temporal time series data, that technically means like you get measurements at different points of time. So let's say you have like a growing period, you regularly do measurements maybe every week. And that means you get this kind of the measurements in your network and you want to have some prediction. And this can be actually in two cases. Either you want to make the prediction at the time, let's say you have observation of what is my current biomass, what I have on the field, that you want to have regular prediction, or just like at the end, at the growing season, so what should be like the output, what should be like the forecasted yield, for instance. To the lack of time, I will mainly talk a little bit using these convolutional networks, but we also have done actually a lot of work for time series analysis. So I just want to give just like the little basic of convolutional networks. So what I mentioned is like at the beginning you have some kind of data spatially arranged. So think about images or hyperspectral images, remote image, whatever measurement what they do. And there are some kind of operations which then called convolutions, and they actually modify your input data. And the basic operation, this is like a convolution. And if you just think about basic operation like plus, minus, multiplication, division, convolution is like the fifth basic operation. So this is actually, you should know, because you can tend to think about it, what photosynthesis is for plants, that's convolution for analyzing data if it's in a grid structure or even in a time series. And the principle is relatively straightforward, because this, let's say, is your input image, and a convolution in this case is defined here by a convolution kernel, and this example is here like a 3x3 grid, and you have some values on it. And what you do, this is actually what you see on your left side. You go over the image with your convolution kernel, and what you do is actually a very simple operation. You take the values what you have in a convolution kernel and then multiply is the values what you have in your data. And then you compute the average of all the values. And if all the values are the same, you have an effect, you take an image and you plot them. And depending what kind of values you have in your convolution kernel, you get a different modification of your original data. And this is an example, can be in 2D, but you can also have like three-dimensional kernels, but this is the basic principle. You combine it also with some kind of nonlinear function, but now what the convolutional network is doing, instead of manually specifying this kind of the values, what the engineer or what the researcher maybe would do, everything is learned by a neural network. And this is like the nice property of the neural networks. You don't have to do anything manually. In theory, everything is completely learned from the data. And now comes why the word deep. Because you not have a single convolution, you have many convolutions. So in each of the blocks here, you actually have several convolution parallel at the same time, which manipulate and change the output of the image. And again, you run more and more convolutions. And the word deep learning simply refers is like you not have like 2 layers or 3 layers, you have many layers. And this is something what changed a lot in the last years. So let's say if like 2012, there was like 8 layers, and then the size more or less increased, just making more layers, but all the concept is still the same, very small convolutions plus some nonlinear functions. And the network's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we have no problem to train networks with 1,000 different layers. So this is possible. So this is the term deep learning, which means like you have some networks, like convolutional networks, and you have many kind of layers which are somehow stacked over each other, and it means the networks have many parameters. So what does end-to-end learning mean? So deep learning, end-to-end learning is not the same. But in most cases you use deep learning for end-to-end learning. So let's say you have kind of a current existing processing pipeline. And I think this picture is also taken from Hannes Schar's survey paper. I think it's not the original work as I get it. You have plant data as your observation and you want to predict something about it, which can be very complex, like what will be the yield of the plant at the end of the season? What is the nutrition efficiency, for instance? So all this kind of complex traits, this is what you're interested in. So you have your measurement, and this is what you're interested in. And in most cases, a traditional pipeline is like you do many kind of intermediate steps. So if you take like an image observation, well, obviously you may be interested in the plant, so you might want to reduce and get rid of the background. So you do some kind of getting rid of the background. So this means like you already apply different kind of algorithms to your pipeline. Then you might actually segment the leaves, because the leaves might give you some kind of information. So you after this output, you apply another algorithm to do then the segmentation of the leaves. And then you can extract some traits like leaf size, what is the angle between the leaf and the stem, all this kind of the traits we you probably ought to use. And then you take your favorite machine learning library, and this exactly gives you then the output of what you actually wanted to have. So this is like the traditional pipeline, but this pipeline is super inefficient. Because the main problem is like you have many kind of algorithms, what you do in between, and in each step you lose information. And that's not what you want to have. The other problem is like your interest is the output there. And typically it's like you might be not satisfied, and then it's the standard way, I want to get better results. And the standard way is like, okay, someone improves the algorithm here, someone improves the algorithm here, someone does some better approach for machine learning. That you can do, but this is super inefficient. And the idea for end-to-end learning is like throw everything away. Forget about everything. The only thing what you need is your input data and what you want to predict. And your entire processing pipeline in end-to-end learning is completely replaced. There's no pre-processing, there's no post-processing. So this is like the ideal case of end-to-end learning. You take your data, your measurements, what you have, and you train the network directly to predict what you're interested in. And not some intermediate outputs like the number of leaves, which you might be not are interested at all. To train such a model, you need training data. And that means what you need is pairs. And a single pair consists like one, let's say, input image of a plant. And for this plant, you have done your measurement. So you know for this plant, you exactly know whatever the nutrition efficiency is, for instance. And you not need a single pair, you need many pairs of the training data. So the question is, why should you then use deep learning approach at all? Because you might have like a very well-engineered processing pipeline, and the answer is actually rather simple. Because what we observed in other disciplines, it makes everything more accurate and faster. So this is just an example, but everywhere where deep learning was established, everything completely changed in the disciplines. If it's speech recognition, is it processing audio data, is it processing video data, everything has completely changed. And this is just an example from image classification. So you have a traditional processing pipeline which gives you like an error rate of 25%. Just think about it, you have a robot for weeding and 25% error to recognize if it's wheat or not a correct plant. Which means like most of your harvest will be gone because your robot will kill many correct plants and also still wheat will remain. Which means like an error of 25% recognition rate of different kind of wheat or non-wheat, this is like pointless, it's completely useless. And at this point people thought like to solve this problem, this will take maybe like 10-15 years until you can actually use it very accurate for commercial application. But then deep learning kicked in and then the error went very quickly down after 3 years to a very low error rate, less than 4% error rate. And this is like the effect is like from the traditional pipeline doing actually replace it by deep learning approaches and using end-to-end learning. And this is not only for image classification, this is everywhere where deep learning entered the field. So in summary, deep learning is actually, it outperforms, so this is the experience what we have in other fields, any kind of standard processing pipelines in terms of accuracy, and it's also very fast. Because you simply have a single neural network, you don't need the intermediate steps. But be very careful, deep learning is not neural networks in general. So what we actually have nowadays, we have nice network architecture which are very fast, a very high performance, but if someone partly offers you just like to do the job with a standard artificial neural network, you might get something like this. And that's probably not what you want to have. It's slow, it's unreliable, and technically you would rather use a bike. So you always have to be very careful. Deep learning is not equal to neural networks. It's just like the very high performance neural networks. That's what you're looking for. So how can it be used in crop production? So this is some kind of topics what we have in the excellence cluster of PhenoRob. So a classical problem is like if you want to detect biotic or abiotic stress in plants. This is a classical approach where you can use end-to-end learning. You have your data as your observation and you directly make the prediction and segment the parts in your plants which are affected. So this also has another opportunity. For instance, you might at the moment have some kind of measurements where you can actually figure out where certain kind of stress factors are. But you can also consider, it's like if this measurement is more expensive, you can also consider to replace an expensive measurement by taking cheaper measurements and then use deep learning, which gives you the prediction of the expensive measurements. So this is also a typical approach how you use deep learning. If your measurements, what you can have to generate the ground truth, this will be your training data. Then technically you take much cheaper data, maybe just like images with a variation of the bandwidth, and then you can directly predict and try to segment if you can get the same result or very close, but just like at a much cheaper cost. Because at the end, this is very important if the technology actually has to go on the market. The other application what I mentioned already, if I want to predict any sort of complex traits, so if I have some kind of a processing pipeline already, you might actually to consider to replace it by a deep learning approach. Another example, though this was already given by Heiner in the first presentation of the seminar series when it comes to count. So for instance, if you just want to have from a single image and know how much biomass is there, this is a classical approach where you can simply use deep learning. And the thing is like the same is also like you can also train humans to do it. So a naive approach is like you would try to count, but humans would be very slow. Interesting is you can actually train humans, it takes also some years, that they can, given from the image, exactly can tell you with a very good accuracy what is the number of plants or what will be the biomass. But if you can train a human, you can also train a neural network and you have it forever. Another topic, because this is more kind where you would like apply convolutional networks, time series, because this is also very important because you want to have the data over time. And the other thing which is also relevant is actually like when we want to have the model how actually the behavior and the technology will distribute in the future. That means like what you have to do is like you have to model the behavior of different kind of agents, farmers, shareholders, whatever you want to do. And this is also where you can't use this kind of temporal models, where technically each of the model has kind of like their perspective, and you try to train to predict and forecast how the behavior of the different shareholders will be. So this is also like an example which also is mentioned as a potential project together with Upscale, where deep learning has a high potential. So this is technically like the opportunities, very briefly. And you actually have to think about it. Do we have something where I can use it? But now we'll come to the challenges, because this is a little bit very important to understand, can I use the deep learning directly, or are there some problems? The first question you should always ask, how much training data do you need? And unfortunately, I don't know. I cannot really tell you because I don't really know the data what you're working with. So the only thing what I can give at the beginning, just like an example of the size of the data what we work, but it doesn't necessarily translate to the data what you're working. So for instance, like for analyzing video data, it's like we created kind of a data set where we annotated 1,000 videos and like 250,000 of human poses, which means like you click on each of the joints in each of the frames. So this just gives you just the idea of the size of the data, what you need. Partly if you have temporal models, then you need a lot of data. Another example, though, this is like also from a previous project, also together with Sven Binke and Sir Stuffness. So we also annotated laser scans. So it's like 45,000 laser scans, and for each of this kind of the 3D point of your laser scan, here you have some semantic annotations, what is road, what are buildings, what is vegetation, what are cars, and so on. So it's just like give you an idea of the size of the data what we use. And now it's the important message, because this is the usually case where there are problems or collaborations. Don't be afraid to annotate data. And just to say it very simple, because in most cases say it's like, well, I have data, but the annotation of data I'm not really interested in. This is the completely wrong to think about the problem. Because at the end what you want to have a system that gives you the best prediction, and then you use it for something else. It's just a tool for you. And instead of thinking like, well, I'm too lazy to annotate my data, could you not have an algorithm which addresses this problem? The answer, yes, it is possible, but you will get less accurate data, less accurate prediction. So the summary, if you can do annotation, do the annotations, otherwise it's just a waste of time. There's another problem, and this is memory. So all the kind of the networks, you have to use GPUs to train them on it. So this is not a problem at all. It's also straightforward to use multiple GPUs. There are libraries that do everything for you. This is also straightforward. But you have to bring everything on the memory of the GPU. And that's a real bottleneck, actually a major bottleneck for deep learning. The minimum what you need, you have to bring at least one training pair. More would be better, but it's the minimum. You have to bring one training pair plus the model, which can have also several gigabytes, on the memory of your GPU. And it's like, if you take the V100, which is also here in the supercomputing in Unix used, then technically you have 32 gigabytes. But you also have to consider, so the hardware, what we actually have in our group, we only have 10 to 11 gigabytes, 11 to 12 gigabytes, which means like we will also need this kind of the hardware, which was in the proposal, but we have to live with see with the budget cut. But this we need to have the models. Because for time series analysis, partly for like a longer time of series, we will need all this kind of the memory, plus do a lot of engineering to bring the data on this kind of the memory. So this will be required. When it comes to collaboration, there's another issue. And this is like the expertise, because you can actually think twice. So what can you do depending on the project? Either you take someone which has not like the computer scientist background, but you can train the person. And the good news is there are some good libraries, there are pre-trained models, and in some cases this would be actually good enough for a starting point, and directly from the beginning with a little bit of training, maybe just like a half year, then you outperform a traditional pipeline. However, if you need more, you have to actually hire computer scientists. Because even there are libraries, the person here, which is not, with a little bit training, he can use an existing model, he can retrain on the data, but he doesn't have the capabilities to know what I have to change on my network to get the maximum out of it. And this is actually like the tricky part of deep learning. It's like you have pre-trained models that work out of the box, but there are many ways what you need to do to improve your model. And this is like you need experience, a lot of experience with deep learning. And you can also see the other way around. If you ask a computer scientist which has the necessary background to build your model or build a house, you will get this type of house building from Lego bricks. But you also have in deep learning many kind of components you have to bring together. With less experience, you will have also a house, but it will be a little bit less fancy. But you have to a little bit consider, depending what you need. And this is also in general for the excellence cluster. For some cases it might be better and more efficient to take someone with a strong crop protection and give them the necessary background on deep learning. In other cases, we actually have to hire a deep learning expert. But now comes the other one. It's not only, and this is the interesting part, it's not only the experience in deep learning. Because we also have to make sure that the experience with the data what you're working with. Because the first point was like, how many data do you need? I know it for the data we working with it, but I cannot give you the answer with the data you working with it. And this will be very critical. If you want to get the maximum out of it, these two people have to work closely together. Because otherwise you will get something, you will get improvement, but you don't get not the maximum out of it. And now coming back to my limited data problem, obviously if I can annotate it, annotate it. But in some cases you cannot do it. An example is like you have kind of a measurement device, which actually you can only do the measurement only very rarely. Or the other example, because you have like plants, they have to grow, there has to be a long time until the data, and you have old data, but the measurements were not as accurate as in the past, or in the past not as accurate as nowadays, then it's probably you cannot do any annotations, because its annotation can only be given by experts, but not necessarily by devices if you don't have it. And there are two cases. The first case is you have a limited amount of data, but it's nicely annotated. The answer is very easy. Don't use deep learning, because this is not what the approaches are designed for. If you know that this is the road where you have to drive, you can take this car, but it will not be any fun. It's possible, but it's not the right tool. If there's this road, there are other tools from machine learning what you should use. Now let's come to the interesting case. You have data, but it's not what we want to predict, is not directly there. So for instance, you have like kind of the plants, and you want to have like, if there's kind of a fungus infection in some part of the leaf, you want to actually segment this kind of the part. Or another example is, let's say you want to have prediction at a plant level, but all the measurements what you have done is maybe on a crop of, let's say, 1 × 1 meter. So we don't have the annotation and the granularity what you want to predict. In this case, you can still do something. The training data, however, is a little bit different. And here you have in this example, so we want to segment, let's say, leaves which are infected by some fungus or something else. But the data what we have is just like image of entire leaves, and we only have the label per image. The plant is healthy, there's no any sign of stress. Or we have samples of plants which suffer from stress. So in this case, the training data we saw is weakly supervised because the annotation what you need is a precise localization where the fungus is. But here you simply have an entire image, but you don't have the precise localization. The good news is, in this case, you can still train a neural network. It's a weakly supervised case, and we also have a strong background in this kind of direction. And then technically means like, if you trained on this type of data, you can still do a prediction with your network. Which means like, the network is trained on data which is weakly annotated, but the system actually learns from the data a more precise prediction. So better accuracy than you have in the training data. Well, this sounds good, but I also have to mention, if you train it directly, everything nicely annotated, your prediction will be better. The summary is like, Yes, if you have the constraints, it's possible, but if there's any way that, let's say, you spend maybe 50,000 euros to make the annotation better, make the annotation better, because at the end, after 1 year, everything will be, overall the cost will be cheaper. Now we come probably to the biggest problem, what we have in crop production. Because one of the problems, most of your training data is probably captured in a greenhouse. But what we also want to have in the excellence cluster, we have to make it on the field. And this is a huge problem. Because your training data looks very different, the input data, to what you will then observe in the field. So for example, it's like the lighting conditions are completely different. Let's say this is like what you trained, your tomatoes, and now you have learned something to do prediction, and this should be the move on the field. A huge problem. Because the input light looks so different, you have different light, you have a different camera, the viewpoint is different, everything looks different. And the worst case scenario is like you have limited variation of the input data in your training data, but you have high variation what you then have if it should become in production. This is a huge problem, and unfortunately I have to say that actually this way how to do the generalization or the adaptation to changing conditions, this is like the big difference between the human brain or humans, what we can do, and deep learning, what deep learning cannot do. And this is like one of the most important issue in deep learning, how we can actually learn the models that are generalized better if the condition change from here to here, or at least with minimal effort to adapt the model. So this is a huge problem. And I think this is the type of the data what we also have if you want to have phenotyping in the lab, bring this phenotyping out of the field. At least one can do something, and that means like what you can do, and we also do substantial work in this direction, how we can transfer or change a model trained on this type of data that it also works on the field. And this is in general called domain adaptation, and this is also something what we do. And just give you a kind of example, for instance, you can train on the synthetic data, which is also very different to your real images. You train on this data, and then you try to recognize the object on real images. So this is a typical example where you have a big change of your input data. But as before, like in weakly supervised learning, it's possible, but if the training data is the same, it's somehow possible to do it by measurements, do it by measurements. You can do kind of a workaround with algorithm, but you should only use it if there's no other way, because you always will lose accuracy. And now coming just like to the last part, because the core project, so this is actually from the presentation from the hearing. So today I only talked about the first part, and this is like one of the things what we mentioned in the proposal and also showed in the hearing is like we want to actually replace some traditional processing pipeline by end-to-end learning. So this is one of the scientific targets what we promised in the proposal. And the other thing is like we also, when we have this established as the first step, the second step, which is also directly I think an own core project, is like to identify the features and the measurements which are relevant. Because technically, one of the purposes is like we want to reduce the cost of the measurements. We want to make some prediction. Even the measurements what we have, they're simple, not yet practically to work it on a farm. And this is exactly where this kind of deep learning helps. And the feature selection has two purposes. First, maybe we reduce the cost of the measurements, but also give feedback to the modelers what kind of information is exactly required. Where's the information coming from? And this information is helpful for breeders, for modelers, for everyone who wants to get a little bit new insights. So this brings me already to the end. So I hope just in a short time, we can convince you that technically deep learning has been a game changer in many disciplines. This already starting in crop production. And if you think like, yeah, well, you want to stick to your processing pipeline, at some point you anyway need to throw it away. Either you switch to deep learning or someone else will do it. But as long as you have training data, everything will be replaced by deep learning. So this is out of question. But on the positive side, there's huge potential. Because you can maybe do some prediction what you had much faster, much more accurate, or just like at a lower cost. Because you can do some prediction with devices which are much, much cheaper. And the learning does the job for you. But the important thing, there are still challenges. Not in all the cases will be possible to use deep learning. And the important thing is very important that people from deep learning, so from our group and people from crop production, that there's a close discussion, because an understanding of the data, because if you say a problem, one has to look at the data. Only at this point I can actually tell, does it make sense to use deep learning, or if there are any problems. So this brings me to the end of the talk, and I think there are no time for questions.